If you had the choice of eating at a high-class restaurant and getting whatever you wanted, or eating some dirt you found outside, which would you pick? To some people, that's the same as comparing the Switch OLED to the Switch Lite. It's fair to say that the Nintendo Switch is a pretty neat system. Play console games on a handheld games on a console, all without needing to buy an add-on, swap cartridges between different systems, or worrying about whether your save data will make the jump. The Switch may not be the most powerful system, but it excels at being convenient. But the Switch is just that. It plays games, it talks to the TV, and as a nifty little thing, it is a nifty little thing. And for about 2 years, playing with the Switch either meant you were fiddling with the lights, or using this gray rectangle with whatever Joy-Cons you had. But that all changed when Nintendo decided to say goodbye to the 3DS and finally release their next dedicated handheld, the Switch Lite. On paper, the Switch Lite is just a smaller and cheaper Switch model. It doesn't have rumble, the controllers can't be removed, the system can't dock, the right side doesn't have IR, and the whole thing is just smaller and lighter than a regular Switch. To most people, the Switch Lite was just seen as a way to get multiple Switches into one household. A lot of families wouldn't dare tell 2 kids to share a Game Boy. So each child got a Game Boy, a DS, a 3DS. But when it comes to buying even just 2 kids a $300 system, that probably won't stand for most people. And for every kid you add, that's another $300 you have to spend. Sure, sharing is an option, but if everyone wants to have a good handheld experience, you'll be buying multiple systems. If you have 3 kids who want to play Minecraft together, that's possible through local wireless multiplayer. But everyone needs a Switch. If you don't have that, you're stuck with split screen. While $200 for the Lite isn't that much cheaper, it's tied with the price of a new 3DS XL, which at least put it in the same ballpark as the handheld Nintendo wanted you to buy before the Switch Lite came out. And another 2 years later, the Switch OLED came out, leading to people going, "Switch who?" When the Switch OLED was announced, it pretty much overshadowed the original Switch and Switch Lite in a lot of people's minds. Sure, if you already had a Switch, the OLED might not have been worth upgrading to. But the Switch Lite was no longer just another option. It was an inferior option, at least to some people. And the Switch OLED brought quite a few upgrades compared to the regular Switch. The main selling point is the bigger OLED screen, but there's also the better speakers, better kickstand, better dock, and generally better build quality. To a lot of Switch owners, the OLED was worth buying just because of those nice upgrades. And that led to there being 2 Switch models in the conversation. The regular Switch, which was mostly owned by relatively early adopters, and people who just didn't care about the upgraded features, and the OLED, which was used by people who wanted to squeeze every ounce of visual quality they could out of their 720p handheld. But the Switch Lite is usually left out of the conversation. It's still seen as the option for the people who will settle for the worst model. If you want the best handheld experience you can get, you want an OLED. But I think it's worth looking at both models and giving them a fair comparison. And there's no better place to start than with the big downside of the Switch Lite. There's no dock. I know, this is Portable Oddities. If you want an in-depth look at a home console experience, this is the last channel you should go to. But that doesn't change the fact that the Switch is treated as a home console you can take with you. That means the best way to play will often be on a TV screen with a Pro Controller. And while every Switch model can play those games in handheld mode, TV mode just isn't an option for the Switch Lite, which is a deal breaker for a lot of people. The Switch Lite also doesn't have a kickstand or removable controllers, so while you can use controllers like the Pro Controller and Joy-Cons wirelessly, you'll need something to prop the Switch up on. And that means games like Ring Fit Adventure and Switch Sports won't be comfortable to play, even if you can get a pair of Joy-Cons going that you either bought separately or took from another Switch. And even if the game is compatible, some features might still not work properly. Mario Odyssey uses HD Rumble to let you find the locations of certain moons. Thankfully, a workaround was added to the game for when you don't have HD Rumble available, but for other games, there's no feasible workaround. Game Builder Garage lets you use the IR of the right Joy-Con, which isn't there on the Switch Lite. Brain training uses IR for certain modes as well, and some Labo games won't work either, though that last one is for a few different reasons. It's easy to find flaws with the Switch Lite, but the majority of games that you would want to play on a handheld actually work fine. Most games don't use IR or HD rumble for more than a few gimmicky parts of the gameplay. While it's cool to see the IR camera get used well, you pretty much only get that with Game Builder Garage, and only very rarely. HD rumble is pretty similar in that regard, though missing out on rumble altogether can be annoying. A bigger hurdle is the fact that the controllers can't be removed, and I personally wish you could use a Switch Lite as a Pro controller. That way you could bring the controller you're used to a friend's house, like the regular Switch users can. But as a positive for the controls, the buttons are a lot less clicky than regular Joy-Con buttons. That may sound like a negative, but it means you won't be annoying people with clicky buttons when in public. It's also worth mentioning that the Switch Lite has a regular D-pad instead of the separated buttons on the Joy-Cons, but the D-pad isn't very good. It's incredibly easy to hit a direction you weren't meaning to hit. Hitting up when you mean to hit left or right is very easy, making the D-pad pretty much worthless for games like Tetris. The Joy-Con's D-pad isn't great, but at least it's precise. All of those downsides sound pretty bad, but they're also expected. You can look at a list of removed features for the Switch Lite, see everything I said, and you wouldn't really be surprised. There are compromises, but if you were interested in a Switch Lite before you heard everything I just said, nothing should have changed. The Switch Lite still plays the vast majority of Switch games, and it runs them the same way the regular Switch and the Switch OLED do. The performance is the same, and to top it off, the Switch Lite is more comfortable. You can hold it in one hand pretty easily, and I don't mean grabbing it from the middle. It's small and it's light, and for a handheld, those are pretty good upsides. And on the opposite side, you have the Switch OLED. This version of the Switch is the model most people would say to go for, and there are some good reasons. The OLED screen is really nice to look at, and while I can't tell a pair of $20 headphones apart from a $200 pair, the speakers did get a nice upgrade, especially for songs with vocals. Comparing everything else is honestly not worth the time. The downsides that come with using a Switch Lite aren't here. The OLED uses regular Joy-Cons, meaning IR is back, clicky buttons are back, and you can swap your controllers around to fit your style. You can dock the OLED, you can kickstand the OLED, and you can feel vibrations from the OLED, or at least its controllers. But I think it's worth taking a closer look at some of the factors that make a difference. For one, while the OLED has better build quality, it's quite a bit heavier. It's actually the heaviest Switch model, which makes it pretty uncomfortable for long periods of time. It's also a lot bigger than the Lite, and while a lot of that size is a big beautiful screen, even that has a little bit of a downside. Whether you're using a Switch, Switch Lite, or Switch OLED, some things stay the same. The screens are the same resolution of 720p. A lot of people think 720p is bad, but in reality, it's a trade-off. More pixels mean more power consumption. That's fairly minor when it's plugged in, but on a handheld, it can make a big difference. But another misconception about resolution is that it matters in the first place. The term pixels per inch refers to how many pixels the screen has relative to its size, and that's what matters. There's no point in making a smartwatch with a 4K screen, and when you're making a handheld with a tiny screen, you don't need 1080p. But it wouldn't always hurt. On the Switch Lite, it's pretty hard to tell where each pixel starts and stops, while the OLED isn't nearly as forgiving. Whether or not that's important is a matter of opinion, especially at the still pretty small size of the Switch OLED screen. It's not like the OLED has a bad-looking screen, and there are some games that show why I prefer to use the Switch OLED in handheld mode. Some games have small text, which is generally easier to read on the bigger screen of the OLED. Text-heavy RPGs that were made first and foremost for the TV are particularly frustrating on the smaller screen of the Lite. Some games just don't work well on a small screen. Big, expansive games like Pokemon Legends Arceus and Breath of the Wild feel cramped on the screen of the Switch Lite, while the OLED feels like a decent size. Though some games still feel like they need to be played on a TV to really be enjoyed. And some games just take advantage of the OLED screen. Persona 5 Royal is a good example, but really any Switch game will look better on an OLED screen, if only by a little bit in some cases. So if I were to recommend either Switch to someone I don't know, I would recommend the OLED. Its few downsides don't bring it down enough that I'd say the Lite is a better option for most people. But that doesn't mean it's the option everyone should go with. If portability is a big deal to you, it's hard not to recommend the Switch Lite. It's small, it's light, it's a genuinely good handheld. And while I have a hard time playing certain types of games on the Lite, that's mostly because I just haven't used it much. The LCD of the Lite may not be as colorful or bright as the OLED, but it's still a good LCD. And some games actually feel a little better on the Lite. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl and Link's Awakening were originally designed for handhelds, and they feel right at home on the smaller screen. So like all things, it really is a matter of opinion. The Switch OLED is the better model on paper, but if you aren't looking for a Switch that can dock, and the portability matters more than the quality of the screen, the Lite is a very strong option. Though I can't say the same about eating dirt.